Chapter 1. The Best Day. Jodie had that fizzy, foamy feeling in her tummy, as if she had swallowed a chemistry set, and it was now doing its own experiments inside of her. If any other moment in life had been as exciting as this, she couldn't think of it. She was here. She was actually here. The 25th of November, 1984. This was the coolest date in the whole time, and she was sitting in, waiting for the musicians to arrive. Just before, she had been in stupid 2075. They don't even make new music in 2075. The closest thing is a beat sheet, a kind of flat hat you place on your head that pulsates in an odd rhythm and touches nerves to make your body move as if you're dancing. It's rubbish. But she didn't have to worry about that now. She was at the Psalm West studio in Notting Hill in 1984, and just about every single cool band from the 80s was about to arrive. It was the day they recorded Band-Aid. She had seen the video 100 times on her iPad 50 and knew the background. A man called Bob Geldof, who was in a band called the Boomtown Rats, wanted to change the world and end poverty in Ethiopia. He had seen films of children starving and dying of thirst and knew that there was enough money in the world to save them, and if they could just get people to give some of theirs. So he decided to record a song to raise money. Of course, this kind of thing had been done hundreds of times since, but this was the first time, and no one seemed to know how important it was at that time, which is why Jodie was so excited to watch it unfold. She knew that all the musicians turned up in their old clothes as if they were just popping to the shops. They sung a bit of their song and then they were off. There were even children there, which is why she didn't have to worry about any kind of disguise. She could just blend in, wander around, and everyone would think she belonged to somebody else. Maybe she was the daughter of one of Spandau Ballet, or U2, or Duran Duran, or Sting's Boy George, or George Michael's little sister. Maybe she was the fourth, much smaller, red-headed member of Bananarama. She would work that out later. But for now, she was just in an empty recording studio, waiting for it to fill up with people with whom she could do her blending. It was 10:30 a.m. Recording started at 11. She squished herself under the recording deck and waited. It was a gloomy place at that moment, with only strips of modest November daylight finding their way in. But the room would soon be so bright with the stars that she would need to wear shades. The anticipation was almost too much to bear, but all she could do now was wait. As she waited, she pulled a library card out of her pocket, perhaps to pass the time, or maybe because she could think of nothing else to do. It usually made her smile. It was the key to limitless adventure and exploration, but she couldn't help frowning as she looked at it. There were 3 problems. Firstly, she knew that she didn't have much time left on it. All students at her school were only given 5 hours time travel at a time, and she was definitely close to her limit. They were really only supposed to use the time for curriculum-based research, for example, tracing the family tree or seeing how people used to live in other times. Jodie had other ideas. She loved the 1980s, and she loved books, both of which were frowned upon in her time. In fact, books were illegal since the 2020s. The second of her problems was the 1-hour springback that all cards were fitted with. She had timed her visit such a way that she would definitely arrive before anyone else, but she would be pinged back to her own time before Band-Aid had been completed. At least she got to see some of it, though finally, and she hadn't really noticed it before, her card was looking rather tatty. She had used it so much it was starting to fray at the sides and bend in the middle. She hoped that it didn't affect the way it worked. As she sat under the mixing tape desk, turning her card over and over between her fingers, she realised she had a 4th problem. Miss Noble, the librarian. If she wanted more time or to discuss the springback or even get a new card to replace the old one, she would have to speak to Miss Noble. And it was as plain as the great big nose on this grumpy lady's face that she would rather eat a bumblebee sandwich than help Jodie with anything. Jodie had no idea why, but Miss Noble had always disliked her and made no secret of it. She would shout and rage and wave her hands and cast a dark and menacing shadow over the 12-year-old if she so much as spoke when she was not supposed to. She thought of the woman, made Jodie sweat a little, and then she felt relief as she was several miles and 91 years away from her. She let a little smile grow on her face, and the welcome buzz of excitement filled her once again. In just minutes, Bob Geldof would open the doors, followed by a whole generation of awesomeness. Just enough time to look at the book she had brought with her. She wanted to bring the book about Band-Aid for all of the musicians to sign, but realised just in time that it wouldn't have existed in 1984, and she would be giving herself away as a time traveller. So she bought a book about music from the early 80s, which she had lots of pictures in of the bands that she would see. She had picked it up from an old bookshop in 1994, along with a copy of Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, which she had read 1,000,000 times, although maybe she's exaggerating. It was nice to be in a place where she could handle the book freely. Her book collection in 2075 had to be a secret. She didn't quite know what the punishment would be if she was caught with them, but she knew it would be steep. She understood why. Books had been used in biowarfare in the 2020s, the paper laced with biological weapons to assassinate world leaders, and it had been illegal ever since. Of course, everyone had an e-reader, but it wasn't the same as feeling and smelling the delicate age of a book, holding a story in your hand and enjoying it the way the author meant you to. It just wasn't fair, which is why Jodie completely ignored the rule. There was suddenly a noise at the door. Jodie stuffed the book in her bag. It was a shuffle of a key in the lock. They were coming. All of her heroes from the 80s were coming. The best day of her life was just moments away. But then, the best day of her life became the worst day as she heard a giant ping, and just as she saw Bob Geldof's foot step into the studio, her whole body was snatched into the air. It was as if she'd travelled to the 1984 on an elastic band and was now being catapulted back to her own time through a swirling vortex of colours and numbers. But her day was about to get 10 times worse. Not only was she suddenly and unceremoniously back in 2075, she had landed on her bottom right on top of Miss Noble's desk, and the demon librarian did not look happy. "Jodie Broom, come down from my desk at once, vermin child." This wasn't good. This wasn't good at all.